Well, we're very fortunate to have two people who are going to give us an early heads up education, and I think it will be very helpful to us on any changes and what's going on right now with the election regulations. I know we hear things all the time on the news all over the country about so many other places, and it's easy to get a little bit of a few extra heartbeats going. But I think they'll be able to tell you some good things that might ease your mind. So we have Tyson Pruitt and also Paul Donnelly, who are going to give you some information and a chance to ask some questions.
Good evening, everyone. So just to clarify, I'm Paul, that's Tyson. And what we talked about earlier was he and I are just going to go back and forth and talk about some of the things that Catherine mentioned. And specifically, I believe we have a presentation as well. Okay. Just a little bit about us. We are collectively the communications team for the Sarasota County Supervisor of Elections. So we do a lot of work with folks like you, residents, voters, and that sort of thing. And part of what we do is come out and try and educate about the work that we do in voting in Sarasota County. So apologies while I turn my back. Tonight, we're just going to talk about, you can see the bullet points up there, really cover a handful of things, a little bit about our office and what we do. Also, as Catherine mentioned, some of the recent changes in election law in the state of Florida. And then lastly, just kind of go over a primer for getting ready for the 2024 election. For us, it's going to be a very busy year. And the more that we can get out and speak with you folks and let you know about deadlines, requirements, that sort of thing, we think it's going to be a better voting experience for everyone. So next slide. Okay. So as I mentioned, we are part of the Sarasota County Supervisor of Elections Office. That is Supervisor Ron Turner. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's been in office for approximately 8 years now. And one of the things that he is fond of saying is that there's no such thing as a small election. And what he means by that is there are relative by size, larger and smaller elections. Is anybody aware of what our next election is in Sarasota County?
Venice.
Ding, 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 exactly. The city of Venice has a general election on November 7th, and it's not a county-wide election, so technically it might not be a large election, but for those residents and those voters in the city of Venice, it's a very important election. And so whenever we talk about elections, there are no small elections, only important elections. So next slide, please, and Tyson. I'm not sure what that slide is, but I'll give it to you. Okay.
So a little bit about our office and what we do. We administer all elections that are in Sarasota County in accordance with federal and state laws. We have 32 regular staff year round. And then when we get close to election time and we're ramping up for it, it can be up to about 1,000 temporary staff and poll workers. So that's everything from the people you would see working at the polling place to we have a lot more need for people that can be couriers inter-office between our office locations and helping us with processing vote by mail, things like that. And then we have 3 full service locations, of course, downtown Sarasota, and then we have a location in Venice at the South County Administration Building and a location in Northport. And next. If we look at Sarasota County, we have about 350,000 registered voters in the county. That number has increased over the past several years. Currently, we're doing some of our list maintenance. We do as a every other year process, and so you may see that number trickling down a little bit, but then it'll go back up as we see more new registered voters going in. We have 99 precincts. We're soon to have 103. The board of County Commissioners just approved that. That's to account for or to accommodate some of the growth in the county. There'll be some new precincts, and we'll talk more about that at a later date. But folks out here on Siesta Key shouldn't need to concern about that. And then here's something that a lot of folks don't realize is next year in 2024, there will be 70 offices that are up for election in races in different parts of Sarasota County. So now we may not see all of them on the ballot, but those are 70 offices that are up for election. So, you know, if there's something you're thinking about running for, or would think you know someone that would be a good candidate for, there are plenty of opportunities. We've got all of those listed on our website. So if you're thinking about it, take a look.
All right, I'll jump back in. And we put this slide in obviously because it's a hot topic for a lot of people to understand recent changes to election law. I joked with Tyson that the word recent is really carrying a lot of weight in that title, because really the most recent Senate Bill 7050 was enacted this year, but for a lot of the changes that we're going to experience in 2024, those laws were actually enacted in 2021, put into place in 2022, but their effects won't really be felt until 2024. So this is something to think about when you're thinking about the election process. First of all, it's a little more complicated than people might think it is, but also there are cycles that we go through from the election cycle, but also through the legislative cycle. So let me give you an example of that. Are all of you aware that the frequency for which you are required to request a vote by mail ballot, if you wish to vote by mail, has changed? Are you all aware of that? Okay, so what's interesting about that is that law was part of SB 90, so Senate Bill 90. Again, that was enacted in 2021. All of the vote by mail requests in the state of Florida at the end of 2022 were wiped off the books. And what it means is if you want to vote by mail going forward, you have to submit a new request to your local supervisor of elections office. The catch to it is that although that happened in 2022, 2023 is really an off year. So a lot of people might not be aware that that has happened. So what's going to happen is we're going to get into 2024, and some of those folks might not be aware. They might still be thinking that they have a vote by mail request on file. They might be sitting at home going, where's my vote by mail request? So one of the things that we're trying to do, again, is get out in the community and let people know about these changes. And again, to reinforce the idea that some of these changes take a long time to really feel the effects in the community. And let's see. The other thing to talk about is the most recent Senate bill, which again is 7050. If you follow that along in the news media at all, you might have heard that it's a vast bill. It touches just about every aspect of Florida election law. And while that is true, what we really want to share with all of you is that it does touch every part of the election law, but for voters, it doesn't change a ton of what you are going to experience on a day-to-day basis. So for example, one of the changes that the legislature put into place is that instead of having 12 days to request a vote by mail ballot prior to the next election, you now only have 10. So yes, that's a change, but that's not a drastic change. And so again, what we emphasize and encourage all of you to do is to keep up with all the deadlines that are associated with all the different elections, and make sure that you're election ready. So when you do have changes in the law that might shrink your accessibility by a couple of days, you're prepared for it because you're looking ahead and saying, oh, I need to be registered by this date, or I need to update my address in this time frame. So that's one of the things we want to express about the latest Senate bill. And then the other thing Tyson mentioned is our list maintenance process. Does anybody know what list maintenance is when we say list maintenance? Anyone? Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's purging people who aren't eligible to vote anymore and adding new people.
Exactly. Well, it's a couple of things. It's exactly that. It's basically keeping the voter rolls accurate is essentially how we look at it. And so there have been some changes with Senate Bill 90, but again, primarily they affect how we do our job and the requirements that are around how we report to the state. But to Tyson's point, right now we have, if you go to our website, we'll have about 350,000 registered voters, and that amount is going to tick down. But what's important to emphasize is you use the word purge. We don't quite look at it as a purge because the process to be quote unquote made inactive and then eventually removed is years long. And so basically we are constantly, even though the state of Florida requires that we do list maintenance in quote unquote off years, so that's 2019, 2021, 2023, the truth of the matter is we're doing list maintenance every day, right? Because our office is receiving information from Social Security Death Index, from the DHS&V, from local law enforcement, from the clerk of the court's office, where voters are reaching out to our office saying, I no longer live in Sarasota County, please remove me from the list. The USPS, we use the United States Postal Service greatly in making sure that our voter rolls stay up to date. And so the idea is what you've heard about some of these law changes, again, they are impactful and they are vast as far as how they impact the election law, but our day-to-day is not drastically changed. And some of the things we're going to talk about as far as being election ready, we'll touch on that because again, as long as you are understanding if you have a vote by mail ballot, or excuse me, a vote by mail request on file, if you know that you want to vote by mail, it's incumbent upon you to check in with our office. You can do that online. You can stop by one of our locations. You can call us on the phone and we'll be glad to walk you through that process. But it is a little bit incumbent upon the voter to keep up with some of that information and make sure that we know where you live, where we can get that ballot to, or that you're aware of where you're going to vote on election day, what precinct and what polling location you're required to, or if you want to vote early, what early voting locations are available throughout the county. So that, Tyson, have I missed anything on some of the changes? No. Okay. And let me just stop before we go any further. We're obviously going to cover a lot of information tonight. At any point, if you have any questions, if I can clarify anything, please don't hesitate to stop. Yes.
If you do decide, okay, this person doesn't belong on the voters list, do you notify them?
It's a great question. So a couple of different things. So the only way that we would be notified of that, we don't have a crystal ball. So there has to be something that comes to our office. Again, if it's something that has to do, if somebody received a felony conviction of some kind that would otherwise make them ineligible to vote, that is an example of that is a faster process where we receive that information, we verify that information. That person is then notified that we have received information that they've been convicted of a felony. If they would like to present their side of the story, they can do that. They can reach out to our office. As with everything with statute, there is a time period for that, but they do have the ability to say, no, you've got the wrong John Doe, and they can present their case. And if it's incorrect information, we will make that right. For everyone else, from a list maintenance point of view, it literally, you are a registered voter, and let's say you don't vote for several years. Well, you don't get removed from the voting rolls if you don't vote. However, if there's no list activity, the state of Florida, or there's no voting activity, the state of Florida says, well, please reach out to that voter. So we'll send you a notice. And if we get that notice back that says that you no longer live at this address, then we're going to continue to send notices until we can verify that. And then let's say you've moved and you forgot to tell us you were moving. You live in Wisconsin now, and we get information that says you live in Wisconsin. We verify that information. We're going to take you off the rolls, right? Eventually, but also if there's a little bit of ambiguity where we don't know, we're not getting verifiable information, you basically go to an inactive status, right? And if you do anything related to voting, if you contact our office and update your voter record, if you sign a petition, or if you show up one day and vote and you're inactive, you automatically get brought back to an active role, an active status. You're not taken off the rolls. If it goes through multiple general election cycles and you don't have any activity with our office, then after, I believe it's 2 general election cycles, so 4 years without any activity, you will then be removed from the rolls. That's why we don't really call it a purge as much as it is. It's a very slow walk process. But what I want to emphasize, if any of those things happen, it's very easy to get back on the roll, right? All you have to do is submit another voter registration application. You can do so online at our office by mail, and you're then registered to vote again. It's not, if you get removed from the roll, again, excepting for a felony conviction, because there's a different process for that. But if it's just one of those things that I haven't voted for years and I've moved around and I haven't kept my address up, it's very easy to get back on the rolls in Florida. We have kind of a saying that it's very difficult to be removed from the rolls, but it's very easy to get back on. Yes, ma'am.
What about folks that live part-time in Florida and part-time in another state?
Yes.
How much time do you have to spend in Florida to be eligible to vote down here?
Well, really, it's a determination of the individual, right? Florida has some unique residency requirements,
What do
or
they do?
it's not, and it's less requirements, it's more guidelines, right? But for us, it is the voter that determines where they live, right? If you can be registered in multiple locations, but you can only vote in one location.
Exactly.
And that's the biggest determination. So there's no requirement for, how long you live in one place or another. It's just, if you have to make a determination of, are you a registered Florida voter? If so, you can vote in Florida. If you vote somewhere else, then you are not a registered voter in Florida.
So you wouldn't have to live here over half the year.
I don't believe so. Not to my knowledge, no.
I just want to add, it could affect if you have homestead exemption, the property appraiser could look at where, if you're claiming your registration, I'll just let you all know, they have been known to look at that information. But Paul's right, it's where you want to personally claim your residence, and it could be in Florida or it could be in another state. You can't vote in both places, because we will find out, or the state, Florida will find out, and the other state will find out, and then they talk to each other, so.
And I would just add to that, I think if you visit the state of Florida's Division of Elections, they have the guidelines for residency. And if you're interested about, go look at those, because they are a little bit unique, right? And it does, to your point, it's like, well, do I have to live here 6 months of the year? The state of Florida has a very, I would say, a very nuanced approach to what it is about residency. But as far as our role goes, if you are a voter in the county of Sarasota, unless you tell us otherwise, or unless we find out otherwise, right? And then there are several processes around that. But with 350,000 people, we can't just be randomly auditing the system. We have to work with the information that we receive. When we receive credible information, then there's a series of steps that goes into play to notify those folks.
Right. You're probably too young to know this, but years ago, women who needed a divorce could get one easier in Florida.
I did not know that.
Yes, and they just came down here, and there was a certain time period, you had to be here 5 months or 6 months or
Okay.
something, and then they'd go in and say, okay, I want a divorce, and you're a resident, fine, here's your divorce, okay, fine, goodbye, I'm on the train, but going back north.
Yeah. Well, it's, your 6-month example, I think that people kind of think, I know that, I've got some Canadian relatives, and I think they always have to be really careful about how long they're in the States and that sort of thing. And that it doesn't quite work that way in the state of Florida. But again, one of the things Catherine said that when she was introducing us is hopefully setting your mind at ease a little bit. So the idea of list maintenance, it is a daily ongoing process. And even though, when we get into the main election year, so the 2022s, 24s, and 26s, when we have larger quote unquote elections, it's harder for us to do as in-depth, and that's why the state mandates that we do it in the off years. But even that being said, we're still constantly, it is, you have to look at the voter roll as a snapshot in time. I mean, if you contact our office, the voter roll is a public record. So you can contact us on Monday, you can request that, we will give you the voter roll, and that's great. On Tuesday, you can request that voter roll again, it'll be completely different. It's just a constant churn. And we have weekly departmental meetings, and one of our voter services managers, he basically gives us the out of county, in county. Here's who registered, here's who moved out, here's our net increase, and it's almost always a net increase.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah, did you really say that people could be registered in different locations and then they just choose which one they want to vote in?
That is my recollection. Now, it's
Vote that year, it's a year, you can't vote. If you vote in 2023 somewhere, you cannot vote in the other state in 2023.
In that
And then if
year.
you vote in 2024 in another state, you can't vote here in 2024.
Maybe on off elections like the
Whatever.
Venice one or something, somebody who lives part-time in Venice, who lives somewhere else, is voting somewhere else, but they can vote on the Venice thing? So is that really true? That I thought we had to we did declarations of residency for Florida.
Well, again, so the declaration of residency, I'm not familiar with that. That's not something our office manages, so I can't speak to that. What I will say is that, again, we are going to follow the information that we receive. We can't, there are safeguards in place that if you are voting, let's say in New York, and we're talking mainly at the federal level here, if it's determined that you voted in an election, in a federal election in New York, and then you either traveled to Florida during that same time period where you decided to early vote, or you voted by mail, then we would find out about that. Now, it's not immediate, it takes time for that process to happen. But it's interesting to think about it in terms like this. We never know how you vote, but we do find out if you voted, right? And that's what's important. So every time you go into a polling location and you basically present your ID and they're doing address verification with you and that sort of thing, that is our check mark to say that this individual has come in and has voted. Now, how you vote, don't know. But that same process is going on in other states. And if it's determined that those two occurrences happen in the same year, then you've essentially committed a fraud, committed a violation. Any other questions? All right, next slide, please. All right, let's see. Sorry. So this is essentially just, yes, thank you. This is the idea. Oh, no, it's all right, it's all right. So one of the things we want everybody to do is be election ready, right? So what does that mean to be election ready? Part of that is to ensure that for anybody in this room that wishes to vote and that is not already registered to vote, take advantage of it and register to vote. I mentioned the Venice election is coming up on November 7th. Tuesday is the deadline to register to be eligible to vote in that election. So keep in mind the 29-day rule. In the state of Florida, you must be registered to vote 29 days in advance of any election. So if you go in, let's say on November 5th, and you want to register to vote, we'll welcome you in, we'll register you to vote, but you won't be eligible to vote in the Venice election, right? Because you have to be registered 29 days in advance for that. And let's see, sample ballots. So again, I'm going to use repeatedly the Venice election because that's what's coming up for us. And so that's kind of the election mode that we're in. So the sample ballot is getting ready to be available online starting tomorrow. So if you're a City of Venice resident, that sample ballot will be available online. So in the Venice election, there's only two races. There are two City of Venice City Council seats, I believe. So not a very big ballot. So a sample ballot really isn't going to help you that much. Again, it's two races. But when it gets into, the 2024 general election, as Tyson mentioned, and you've got at least 70 races on there, or, multiple offices, plus all the referendums and questions that it will inevitably be included on there, you really need to use your sample ballot, right? So there's a couple of ways that you can access your sample ballot. So you can visit our website, sarasotavotes.gov, and you're able to access your individual ballot there. And it bears emphasizing here that everybody in this room won't always have the same ballot, right? It's going to be based on your residency. So on Siesta Key, likely you might have the same, but if you go throughout Sarasota County, people are going to have different districts and that sort of thing. So not everybody gets the same ballot. So it's important to remember. And the way that we do that is you visit our website, go to the sample ballot link, and first name, last name, date of birth. And when that sample ballot is ready or eligible, when we're close enough to the election, when the sample ballot is made available, you can go there and you can review your sample ballot. You can download it. You can print it. The other way that you can access the sample ballot is that we send to all households in Sarasota County a sample ballot. So I want to say that again, we send to all households, not a vote by mail ballot, but a sample ballot, right? Because some residents, they will receive the sample ballot and they will say, I didn't request this ballot, you're sending me a vote by mail ballot. That is not what we're sending you. We are sending you a sample ballot. And one other piece about that is we send sample ballots only to those people who do not have a vote by mail request. Now, why would we do it? Why would we do it that way? Anybody have any guess?
Look at it ahead of time.
Then they get confused, as Mr. Secretary.
So
They
the
vote their sample.
Well, yeah, Tyson is, among other things, also runs our canvassing board, and so he sees some interesting ballots sometimes. But what I would say is, the reason why we send it to everyone except those people who are voting by mail is because those people are automatically going to get the real ballot, right? They're gonna get the real ballot, so we're not gonna spend taxpayer money sending them a sample ballot just so that they can then turn around and get their actual vote by mail ballot. So if you typically vote early in person, or if you typically vote on election day, expect to get a sample ballot in the mail. Also, alternatively, you can visit our website. And then, of course, if you are registered or have a request on file with us to receive the vote by mail ballot, you'll get your actual ballot about 6 weeks in advance of whatever election is next on the agenda. So, and then some of the other things we're going to talk about as we go along here are just some of the best practices to make sure that your election, either your election day process, your early voting process, or your vote by mail process is as streamlined as possible. So next slide, please. And Tyson, I'll give it back.
Yeah, so we've mentioned, and of course, most of the folks in the room probably already know it, 2024 is going to be a busy election year. We have the presidential preference primary that will be on March 19th. The registration deadline for that is February 20th. So that would be the date where any new voters need to be registered, or if you've moved since the last time you've updated your registration, you want to make sure we get that. Or if you want to change your political party affiliation, because Florida is a closed primary state. So you can change your party affiliation at any time, but you know, if you want to make sure you're able to vote in one party or the other's presidential preference primary, this would be the deadline to make sure you're able to cast a vote in that primary.
And how many days is that?
29, yes.
The magic number.
August 20th will be the primary election for all other federal, state, county level offices. And then November 5th next year will be the general presidential election. The deadline to register for that would be October 7th, 29 days before again. And really, your party affiliation only, other than how you think of yourself or identify, in terms of, for our purposes, the only times that you'll really need to be sure you've got that how you want it would be for the presidential preference primary, and then the August 20th primary for the other offices. I'll just cover this one real quick because we've kind of talked about it already, and that is, you know, most folks in the room probably are registered to vote. Just a quick reminder to think about if you've moved or if your name has changed, you want to update your party, and you can do any of those things 4 different ways. When you update your driver's license or Florida ID, you can request that they send an update to us. You can do it at registertovoteflorida.gov. So it's the same form for a new registration as it is if you're making any updates. So if you go to that website, registertovoteflorida.gov, and you start through the process, it'll ask you if you're doing a new registration or if you want to make updates, and you just follow the steps there. You can also take a registration form and make any of your updates to it, sign it, mail it to us, or you can come and visit us in the office and do it there. Any of those 4 ways work. And I'll just go ahead on this one, Paul, because we just talked about it. But yeah, Florida's a closed primary state. There are about 12 states that have closed primaries. And so that's, we've already talked about the 29-day deadline, but that just means, so we know we're going to have a Republican presidential primary. We don't know yet if we will for the Democrats, or if the Democrats will have a primary, because they may not have more than one candidate. But you in Florida law, you have to be a declared member of the party. to vote for its candidates in the primary. And you can change it at any time you want, just make sure it's 29 days before primary. And then you can change it again if you like.
Tyson,
Yes.
doesn't the city of Sarasota have ranked choice voting?
The city of Sarasota, I believe, went or would like to do ranked choice voting, and then they put it in their charter, but there is a conflict with state law. And so they've not enacted it, because of that. It would not apply to the federal and state level races, even if they did. It would be for local offices.
And I believe that, I believe there was, an addition or part of Senate Bill 7050 specifically called out, ranked choice voting and said it was not acceptable. It was not an accepted form in the state of Florida. So to Tyson's point, there is a conflict there, but that's where it stands at the moment.
But that was one of the purposes, was to open the primaries up. Yes, I hear you. Okay.
So again, we're in a situation where we administer the law as it is.
I know they were looking at it. I'm not in the city, so I don't know. Okay, thank you.
Good question.
We talked again about the sample ballot, and Paul mentioned that will be mailed out to every voter for an election that
Household.
every household.
Sorry, I sometimes make that same.
I do that, but yes, every household that is not all voting by mail.
Okay, now it does say here, mail to every household without a vote by
Yes,
mail. So,
correct.
but if you do have vote by mail, you may not get it.
You will not get it.
You will not, because you'll get your vote by mail ballot. And as we said before, they're also available on SarasotaVotes.gov when we get close to that election date. There are 3 ways to vote in Florida. We've kind of talked about all of them. By mail, of course, early voting in person, that will be typically the week before the election. It could be longer than a week. It can be up to 10 or 12 days for the bigger elections, like a presidential year election. And all of those dates, we talked before about some of the deadlines changing on some things. And just as a voter, I would say, where the information coming from our office is going to always be the most accurate we have. So, you can look at what we put on SarasotaVotes.gov in terms of deadlines, when you would need to have a registration change, or what the dates are going to be for early voting, or for when vote by mail is available. We're going to update those dates before each election, and typically we know them months in advance. So please, always look at our website, or feel free to call us and ask.
I thought it was interesting. You said we had 350,000 voters, and you're sending out about 130,000 vote by mail. That's a lot. That's pretty cool.
Do you want to repeat that so they could hear what he said, just for?
Well, we have a stat on the screen that says, I think that was from 2022, is that right? That we sent out approximately 130,000 vote by mail ballots. It's interesting to think and as it relates to our totals, which in 2022 weren't quite at 350, so it's even a higher percentage. But it's interesting because what we're seeing now is a little bit of an uncharted phenomenon, right? Because what happened more or less in 2020?
Oh, pandemic.
Exactly. So a lot of people who might not have otherwise chosen to vote by mail said, you know what, I'm going to do it this election. So a lot of those vote by mail requests were probably still a reflection of that, right? So I think of that 130,000 that we sent out, I want to say maybe around 101,000 actually cast their vote in either the primary or the general election in 2022. And I will say the reason why I'm fairly familiar with that is because that is about the number of people that we sent a notice to when the vote by mail changes happen. So we didn't want to wait. You may be hearing some different media reports that some different counties are having very low response rates for their vote by mail requests following everything being changed. So what Sarasota County did, what I should say Ron Turner decided to do, was he didn't want to wait, right? He knew, because he understood that if you wait until late 2023 or early 2024, you've waited too long, right? So in December of last year, we started, myself, Tyson, and some other people in the office started putting together the notice. And in February, it went out to those 101,000 people. Does anybody have any idea what our vote by mail request totals are right about now? Anybody want to hazard a guess? 75,000. So if you look at that, if you are doing direct mail and you got that, you got basically a 75% return on investment on 75 on direct mail. That would be pretty fantastic from a business point of view. So we're really pleased with that. And the idea is we want more people, if you want to vote by mail, and obviously Tyson just went over the different ways to vote. But just remember, you have to submit that request. Now, does anybody know how often you now need to submit that request? It's every 2 years. Think about it in terms of every general election cycle, right? That's how the statute really puts it. It's every general election cycle. So that, yes, that is every 2 years. So, but just think, 1 year it's the gubernatorial race. The next cycle is the presidential race. The next cycle, just get into, if that is how you choose to vote, just make sure you kind of get into that, and also listen and keep an eye out, because you never know what the legislature might do next year, right? Because and that's not saying anything other than what we talked about at the beginning. In 2021, some laws were enacted that we're only starting to feel the effects of now, as far as the real impacts to voters. So there may be some changes in the next session of the legislature that may further change deadlines, processes, and that sort of thing. So really the best defense for you all as voters is just to be educated, be alert, be aware, and that sort of thing. We will do our best to make sure that you are aware of any changes and how that impacts you, but obviously we can't reach everybody. So it's a little bit based on your ability to learn. Yes, sir.
Under current Florida law, when can you start tallying the votes that get in by mail or early voting?
That's a great question. So the state of Florida is hasn't always been, but currently we like to think that we are the gold standard of voting. And one of those reasons is that we have the 3 ways to vote, right? So there's a lot of flexibility in that, but there's also tradition. There's a hybrid if you want to vote early. But the way that we are very much the gold standard in that is we don't wait till 7:01 on election night to begin counting all of those votes. So think about it from Sarasota County's point of view. We've got 350,000 voters, and we get for the presidential election 80, 85, 90% turnout. That's a huge amount of votes that we have to process. And if it's a vote by mail process, there's a lot of moving parts to processing a vote by mail ballot. So to answer your question, and Tyson will know the exact dates better than I do, but the short answer is vote by mail ballots can begin being tallied as soon as we start getting them back, as soon as the canvassing board is convened. Early voting votes, the same thing. Early voting happens, depending on the election, somewhere between a week to 10 to 12 days prior. All of those votes are being tabulated in advance of that. So at 7:01 on election night, what's going to happen is we have 3 ways to vote. And if you look at our turnout widget on our website, it's going to have a pie chart, and it's basically going to say, these are the number of vote by mail ballots received, these are the number of early votes received, and these are the number of election day results. So at let's not say 7:01, let's say like 7:04. Let's give us a couple of minutes to get it up there. But you will see 100% of the early vote will be tallied by 7:04 on election night. 99.9% of vote by mail balloting will be tallied. The only votes that won't have been tallied at 7:04 are the election day ballots, because those are still being processed, well into the evening, and there's a lot of different moving parts on that as well.
How many precincts again?
There's 103 precincts and about 84 polling locations. Some of our precincts share polling locations. Yes, sir.
And the postmark on a vote by mail, must it be postmarked by day of election, or?
That's a great question. That's a great question. It has to be received by 7 p.m. not 7 p.m. and 13 seconds, 7 p.m. Because what's going to happen is that at every one of those polling locations, the clerk who basically manages the polling location will pull out the phone. And as soon as that phone says 7 p.m., the polling location is now closed. No votes, no voters are accepted at that point. If you are in line to vote, if there is a line and you're in line, then you are certainly welcome to stay there as long as it takes to get you your vote counted. But postmarks, and that's one of the things that we try and do from a communications point of view, is postmarks do not apply in the state of Florida. It has to be received by 7 p.m. on election night. So inside your vote by mail ballot, you're going to have, among other things, you will have your secrecy sleeve, you will have your ballot, you will have your return envelope, and then we add a little something extra in there, which is this pretty unattractive yellow and black insert. But what's good about it is it tells you exactly all of those things that you need. Here's how much postage you need to include on this vote by mail ballot to get it back to us. Here's how long the USPS says you should get it back, or here's how soon you should get it back to us based on the USPS. Let's see, here you don't have to return it by mail. You can drop it off at one of our locations. So all that information is there. And then we remind you in bold print, 7 p.m. on election night. So great question. Yes, ma'am.
So if you put it if you have a vote by mail ballot and you take it to the polls, you can put it in a box at the polls.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's
actually, yeah, so, what we would like you to do, if you're not, if you don't want to put it in the mail, let's say, or let's say you're worried about the deadline, you don't think the mail's gonna get to us in time. What we would like is, during the early voting period, when we have anywhere from 6 to up to 10 early voting sites, you can bring it to any of those early voting sites during the early voting hours, and there's a secure ballot intake station. That's the official name for it, not a drop box. Secure ballot intake station. And so we have those at each early voting location, and then after early voting's over, then let's say your election day, bring it to our office. So bring it into the office here in Sarasota or in Venice or Northport, one of those 3 locations on election day, and we'll take it up till 7 p.m.
Then you're receiving it on the
Yeah, and then it's right in our hands.
Okay, so you're counting the early ballots ahead of time, which is bright. I think that's marvelous. Do you let the media know it?
No, so when we say we're counting them, they're tabulated, but we don't run any reports. We can't by law look at any reports or even generate a report from that. So we don't know what the results would look like at that point.
2 to 4 whatever.
And if you are a poll worker for us, we specifically have training where we identify Florida statute, because let's say you come in and help us do what's called opening. So we got 101,000 vote by mail back in 2022. We have temporary staff that are up on the 10th floor of the terrace building, and they're helping open this. Before we ever start that process, you are read literally the Florida statute that says if you try and glean anything from this as to the, who might be leading based on what your little sample size is, you're committing a felony. So don't do that. Statute literally governs every single thing we do. So yes, we are tabulating everything, but we are not looking, we have no idea what the tabulation results are, only that we are, we're getting in a batch of vote by mails. It's literally big giant trays from the USPS that are they go into, it's essentially an assembly line process, and it gets tabulated, but nobody understands or knows the results of that until those reports start being run at 7:01, 02, 03 on election.
Very good.
Yeah.
I think you're very smart to start tabulating early. I can't understand the states that don't do that.
The states that don't do that are typically the states that have had the most trouble in the past couple of election cycles. And what it does, in my humble opinion, is people don't trust the process, right? But and that's the other thing about everything that we do, there's transparency, right? So as we get ready for the Venice election that's coming up, again, Tyson runs our canvassing board, and that is a canvassing board includes the supervisor election, a county judge, and a member of the county commission. And they're essentially there to review any ballots that have issues with them, right? But the idea is that I completely lost my train of thought on that. I got sidetracked on that. You had made a really great point and I completely. Counting the ballots early, right? But we absolutely don't do anything with them until we release them.
701.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to take it back over?
Yeah, so just real quick, and I know everyone knows it, but as Paul mentioned, I do work with the supervisor and our canvassing board, and we see ballots where it's it's been mailed in to us and it's not always clear what the voter's intent was. And sometimes well, it's like the modern version of that. But please, if you're voting by mail and you're voting at home, do not use a felt tip pen. Do not use a Sharpie, because it will bleed through to the back side of the ballot. And if there's a race on the back side as well, it'll mess that up. So when we'll have the right type of pens in the voting booth. But if you do vote at home by mail, use an ink pen, a regular ballpoint pen in blue or black. Fill in your choices completely, and try not to make any stray marks on the ballot. We do have there is a process for adjudicating anything that the tabulator can't read. So we'll make sure your vote is counted, but it's most efficient if everyone fills in the ovals correctly in the first place.
It makes Tyson's day go a lot shorter if you do that. So please, for Tyson's sake, fill in the bubbles correctly. But that does bring up yes, sir.
Yeah, for the vote by mail ballots, you compare every signature?
Yes, sir.
With the signature back when they registered?
Yes.
25 years ago or whatever.
Well, that brings up a really good.
My signature, did I use my middle name?
Exactly. Well, so we could literally spend the rest of the evening talking about just this one subject. But what I would say about that is it's not the signature that you provided 25 years ago. Perhaps it's the signature that you did most recently when you went to the DHS&D, when you went to the tax collector to update your Florida driver's license, assuming you might have done that. Or maybe you submitted another application with us because you updated your residency, right? Your residential address might have changed. You might have changed party affiliation. Most of the time, that's going to require a wet signature. And what's going to happen is that newest signature is going to supersede the past one, right? And so basically, do we have all of that kind of history of signatures? Yes. But your most recent signature, because as we know, as with a lot of things, as you get older, things change, right? Medication might change the way your signature looks, right? So a couple of things. Tyson mentioned that there's a process for adjudicating some of these things, because if you get 101,000 vote by mail ballots back, you're not getting 100% perfection, right? There are going to be mistakes with it. People are going to make mistakes. They're human. Signatures are going to change. We have a process with that. Florida statute has a process with that. Well, we don't have it up there, but on the vote by mail ballot, on the back of it, where you sign, is everybody who votes by mail, are you familiar with generally what that looks like? Below that, oh, thank you. Yes, below that, if you notice, see where the arrow is pointing down, well, that's a signature line. But then below that, we offer voluntarily, but we offer the voter the option of including a telephone number and/or an email address. And why would we do that? If there's an issue for whatever reason that we can't compare the signature, or let's just say you submitted your signature that is your true and verified signature. It doesn't look a thing like the signature that we have on file. We have no choice but to say, you know what? That's going to make Tyson's life difficult. So here it goes. But what would happen before we make Tyson's life difficult, what would happen is if you filled in a telephone number, what's going to happen? A very nice woman named Olga is going to call you. And Olga is going to say, Mr. or Mrs. Smith, whatever, whoever, we've received your ballot, but the signatures don't match. Here's how you can fix that, right? So there are ways to do that. And we have all of that on our website, on our vote by mail page, where you can learn more about that. But suffice to say, it's not a perfect system. There are things that definitely go wrong, but that's why, if you're a different state and you don't start tabulating that until 7:01 on election night, you can see how it takes 2 and 3 weeks to work through this. It takes us, weeks and weeks to go all through this. And literally, this woman, Olga, who's in our vote by mail department, she will badger you until she gets in touch with you. She will send you emails. She will call you. She's bilingual. So if you can't hide from her, she'll get you. But it's just, there's a lot of things that we do try and put in place, the affidavit to cure your signature and that sort of thing. We have a process, we have, on our website, we talk about your signature. Don't wait for your signature to change. Proactively update it, right? And this is all about being election ready and understanding about your voter record, because we only have what we have, right? We can't go, oh, Barbara's signature probably doesn't look like this anymore. We have no idea. So take ownership of your voter record and say, okay, has my name changed? Has my address changed? Has my signature changed? Do I want to, the state of Florida is not going to charge you extra to go on their website and update you can go up there every day until Sunday and submit a new application, and it will take it and it will update it, and you will get 7 new voter information cards. But that last voter information card that you get is the most recent one, right? So you're not going to hurt anything if you go in there and say, I just want to test the system. You go in there and do this, that's fine. Now, the one thing you can't do is obviously electronically, doing it online, you can't update your signature, right? That definitely needs either an electronic signature from the DHS&B tax collector, or it needs to be on a form that you submit by mail, or needs to be on a form that you deliver to us. But that's one of the ways that the signature process gets updated. And so we just really implore you to be proactive in that, so that you don't end up on election night going, oh, I'm not ready for some reason. Yes, sir.
So what does that mean? How does everybody check to make sure our signature
That's a great question.
is the one that we're currently using when we sign things, if we can't do it when we go online?
That's a great question. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but we can't present you your signature through our website. That we can't do for you, right? I believe there's a statute that will not allow that, but you can come to one of our offices and you can present ID, and they may ask you for, last 4 of your social or something like that to verify you are who you say you are. And then they will, I believe, Tyson, they will show you your signature that we have on file for you. That's probably the most guaranteed way of doing it.
Okay, so I'm confused, because
Yeah.
you're saying you're trying to encourage everyone to make sure our signature is up to date, but we couldn't have 350,000 people going and checking their signature.
No, what I'm encouraging everybody to do is make sure your voter record is up to date, right? And your voter record includes everything, your name, if your name has changed, your party affiliation, your address. If you live somewhere else throughout the year, you have a different mailing address from your residency address and that sort of thing. Your signature is one component of your voter record. So that's what we're suggesting. And one way that you could avoid what you're asking is just simply submit a new voter registration application, which we just so happen to have with us tonight, if you would like to do so. But that would be a way to guarantee that your signature now, if you haven't updated that in several years, it might not be a bad idea. And again, our office is going to accept it, we're going to process it, and your signature is updated, and there's no concern about, does my signature match or not? But again, you can visit us. Yes, we don't want 350,000 people coming into our office. That would be problematic. But if you're not inclined to do that, you can certainly visit one of our 3 locations and do that. Yes, ma'am.
We did that several years ago when my husband said, gosh, my signature doesn't look anything like it used to, so
Right.
we just came on in.
Yeah.
And there was somebody in your office who said that there's, if 3 or 4 letters match the way it used to look, then that will pass. But he just put in a whole new signature.
Sure.
And I don't remember how many letters that was, but maybe the way you form your L's or the way you form something.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, for years, our office has been doing signature verification training. It was voluntary on our part, but we thought for those people that are in our vote by mail team, it's incumbent upon them to be, to have those skills to do it. In Senate Bill 7050, the state has required that to be the case. So we're pretty happy that we were it's not impacting our office at all. It's just, okay, we were already doing this and now the state requires us to do it, so we will continue to do it. So there's the human verification piece of it. There's also an electronic piece that every one of these signatures gets scanned. And so it's getting a human visualization and it's also going through our system. And if one of those kicks it out, it goes Olga and then to Tyson. And when we say Tyson manages the canvassing board, obviously the supervisor is leading that as well, but the county judge, I believe, is technically the person that leads that. Tyson does all of the heavy lifting.
I'm really the secretary for the canvassing boards. When we say, I manage it, so prepare the materials for him and take the minutes on the agendas. And I would just add on signatures, we also have the signature. If you vote in person, we'll have your signature that you do on the electronic poll book at the polling place. So that becomes part of your record. And so that's if you regularly vote in person, that's probably pretty accurate. I mean, it's still signed on a digital pad, which, may or may not feel like it's close enough to your signature. But to Paul's point, where if you think it might not be, then of course we're happy to have you sign, a paper copy and bring it to us or mail it in to us. I guess, one of the last things we're almost done here. And this is, to think about becoming a poll worker if you haven't already, or if you might be interested. It's a fun way to earn $175 more per election. And, most folks probably aren't concerned maybe about the money as much as the experience. A lot of our poll workers really enjoy it. It is a long day, but it's a great way to both serve the community, be part of the election, and really kind of see how an election works from the other side. So, like we said, we have 3 elections coming up next year. So certainly, you can ask Paul and I about becoming a poll worker, or you can go to our website as well, and we have some cards here to learn more about that. And then last thing, just want to plug the website again, and of course everyone's welcome to call us if you're more convenient with, or if you're more comfortable with that. But a lot of the things we talked about, just wanted to make sure we had them all up here. Finding your precinct is another thing. We haven't really talked about that. Finding your precinct and your polling location. I don't think we're going to have any changes coming up for Siesta Key, for the precincts out here, in terms of polling locations. But, don't quote me on that, but I'm 95% confident that.
Maybe just emphasize the difference between early voting and election day voting as far as the requirements that where you vote.
Yes, so and early voting, want to make sure folks know, early voting is not at your polling location. It will be at one of several different sites defined for that election. We talked a bit before, like on a presidential level, general election, we'll have 9 or 10 sites around the county. And you could go to any of those during that early voting period. On a local election, it's like for Venice, it's just the Venice office for that election. Or for the PPP, it's probably not going to be 10 sites. I think it's 6. So that will be our 3 office locations, and then we have 3 libraries. It's going to be North Library, Fruitville Library, and Gulf Gate Library.
Sometimes Venice.
And the Venice Library, so yeah, it might be 7 then, yeah. But we'll have those early voting locations on our website. We'll publish them. We'll try to get media to cover it as well, but if there's a question, please.
If you're on social media, we bludgeon these things on social media. We beat them and beat them and beat them.
Yes, please follow us. Yes, ma'am.
I couldn't see, where's the Sarasota office and what are the hours?
So the Sarasota office is downtown at Washington or 301 and Ringling in the Terrace Building, the older high rise. It's next to the courthouse, and our hours are 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. As we get, like right around an election, the hours might be different, but for just general purpose, 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. Yes, sir.
When you were discussing, people that are registered in more than one state, and you were able to tell if people actually voted in more than one state, how does that work? The cross-reference with social security numbers?
Well, so there are different compacts that are agreements that the states have entered into. I wouldn't want to overspeak too much on how they share that information, but and Paul, maybe but.
Yeah, I would just jump in here to say, did anybody hear recently that the state of Florida withdrew from the ERIC? Are you familiar with that? ERIC is sort of what Tyson's talking about, which ERIC, I believe, until most recently was a compact between an agreement between, I think, 33 states in the District of Columbia to share information, right? If the decision was made at the state level that the state of Florida would withdraw from that, right? But prior to that, that was a really useful tool for determining what you're asking about, if you voted in the state of New York and you voted in the state of Florida over these two same elections, well, that's a red flag, right? And so what would happen is, perhaps in that example, we would be notified, we would do our own, and I'm looking at Tyson because Tyson does a lot with our public records requests, that we would research and determine, did this person vote in that election? If the question is answered in the affirmative, we would then reach out to the state of New York or to the particular county in New York as an example, and find out if they are doing the same research. And then from there, it sort of depends on, how does that get escalated to law enforcement and that sort of thing. That's one example of how that is determined. Now, going forward without things like ERIC, there still are other tools at our disposal. But as Tyson said, I am not familiar fully with that process either. It's not something that we manage directly, but there are means to determine this. And what I would say to that is, they're not necessarily quick, right? It's not a car accident where law enforcement shows up and can determine who was at fault, right? That's not quite, unfortunately, how it works. These are usually multi-year processes where it's determined, unfortunately, can only be determined after the fact because obviously the fraud is committed. But it's pretty safe to assume that if you do vote in multiple locations, you will be caught. And what we're seeing is, just the other day, there was a report about in Sumter County about a voter there who mailed in a vote by mail ballot for his recently deceased father. That was, I think, 2022. So that's relatively quick, right? It might have been 2020. I can't recall. Okay, but it happens. I mean,
4 days after the father died.
Right, it's the arc is long, but it will catch up with you eventually. So yes, it does happen. And the other thing I would say is, obviously there's a lot of information, misinformation, malinformation out there. And voter fraud does exist. That's an example of voter fraud, right? I mean, people do try and game the system. It's very, very, very small. It's very small. And when it happens, and we deal with it appropriately and escalate it to law enforcement. Yes, ma'am.
I was once called on stage during the presidential election and called and very much wanted to vote. And I was told I could vote for the president only and the vice president anywhere.
Nothing what I would say is, we are talking very specifically about Sarasota County, a little bit more broadly about Florida. Anything beyond that, I can't say. So, yeah, it's pretty cut and dry in the state of Florida. You have to be registered in your county to vote. Obviously you can vote, you can live in Singapore and still vote, but it goes back to Sarasota County.
So if someone showed up here in Sarasota County for a presidential election and was not even from the state or registered in the state, they could not cast a vote for president, vice president.
They're simply not on the roll, right? Remember, we talked about the 29 days? Well, yeah, no, I'm not arguing that, but you know, we talked about the 29 days. If you just, let's say you're coming in from Wyoming and just here and say, you know what, I'm gonna vote. Again, you know, you could, if you got here in advance of 29 days, you could say my residency is such and such.
Yeah, but, okay, I was told that the only two votes that I could cast were for president, vice president. None of the other issues, because I wasn't
Well, it would,
president or.
the thing that strikes me odd about that is there's no such thing as a ballot that only has the president and the vice president on it, or the, you know, that sort of thing. There's not, all I'm saying is, at least in my experience, right, you get a ballot based on your residency, and that ballot is going to start at the federal level, and then it is going to go all the way through state races, down to local races, down to referendum. And so if somebody handed you the ballot, you know, could you only vote for the president and the vice president? Absolutely. That's called an undervote, and you can do that all day long. But who would verify it? Who would check it? Right? And that's where I question, because, you know, you would be given, you know, what if you said, I'm not going to just do that. I'm going to vote the whole thing. I'm going to be a rebel.
Well, I know this was in the state of Florida.
Sure.
And I was given a separate piece of paper
Okay.
to verify, you know, where I came from, why I was
Okay.
doing this and that, and then with my ballot.
Okay.
And I could only cast,
And just out of curiosity, was this recently?
no, it was for presidential election probably 10 years ago.
Okay. That's still fairly recent. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing to provide for that, for someone showing up here wanting to vote in a presidential election, that is not from Sarasota.
So, yeah, so they wouldn't be on our rolls. We would, you know, if, yeah, we would ask them to vote provisionally. And then, you know, to be honest, if in the meantime, we are not able to find the person on our rolls, that provisional ballot is ultimately going to end up being rejected. Now.
You know what a provisional ballot is?
Yes. So the provisional ballot could be accepted if in the meantime, they were, you know, there would be 5 days after where they could, you know, prove their identity, other matters, you know, that would be necessary. But I would just, in the instance you're talking about, which, you know, several years ago probably wouldn't have worked, but, you know, with talking about the 3 ways to vote, this is part of why, you know, everybody has to decide which way is best for them, but either voting by mail or voting early, I'll just point out that gives you a little bit of cushion that, if something were to come up on election day, you've already got your vote in and you don't have to worry about it pulling you away. So, yeah, everybody has to choose their own way, because all three ways are legal and equal, but, I personally like getting it in ahead of time.
Thank you, Tyson. Thank you very much.
Thank